gone live on there as well. We are on the lunch break in the questioning of Helen Steel at the undercover policing inquiry. I'm joined by Belinda Harvey from Police Spies Out of Lives, and also off screen by Lisa from Police Spies Out of Lives. Helen's being questioned about about John Dines, the undercover police officer John Dines, who deceived her into a long-term intimate relationship. We've heard a lot about the friendship and the way in which he emotionally manipulated her in numerous ways. What have you made of what she's had to say?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've heard this, the story many times, but you can't fail to be moved when you hear it again, see the letters, hear, the way he manipulated situations and events to be near Helen. He obviously pursued her, and she resisted because it didn't feel natural. And, it's just so hurtful and manipulative, the way that he did it in such a cruel and calculated way, complete disregard for her.
And Lisa?
Yeah, it's seeing the whole story unfold like we have done today, the whole story of the relationship. You really can see how deliberate it is, how, he really, engineered everything so that he could be close to Helen, monopolizing her attention in the pub. We had somebody else say, giving people a lift home from meetings, ostensibly so that he could see where everybody lived. That seemed to be a really clear and obvious tactic. But then deliberately leaving Helen to last so that he would get more time to bond with her, sharing intimate, we now know, made up stories about, about his family background, about losing relatives, about losing his mum. And, now that we know that all of that was made up, you can really just kind of see how calculated it is. And, the bit that's difficult, of course, is, being able to relate it to my own experience and being able to see like some of the same things in letters, in handwritten letters. I mean, the handwriting is even similar. It's quite spooky, but seeing a similar approach in letters to what we've both experienced, from other undercover officers. So you can really see it as a tactic and an MO. And in the break there, I was just talking with some people from with some of Helen's family, and them saying, it wasn't until we saw other letters from other officers did we really see this as a tactic. And I think that is really coming across now in the inquiry, that we've seen a few people have given evidence. Belinda has, and Alison has, and we can really see these tactics as tactics. And then it's hard because it's obviously upsetting, when we've now got a word for it in the common lexicon. We call it love bombing, which at the time we didn't know. I certainly didn't know of that as a concept really when it was being done to me, but it is so clearly and obviously that kind of calculated. And then seeing his reports that he's submitted and seeing his language describing the same events so differently, and then seeing him in his own handwriting, just writing about the same events in letters to Helen. You can really see that contrast of this person who is just, fulfilling all these different roles and doing these different jobs, and the job of being, a loving boyfriend, and the job of writing a report, and just, it just looks so clinical. Like those letters, the letters to Helen seem so clinical when you're seeing them in this context. But the thing that really struck me, and it was upsetting to see Helen get upset, and see how much emotion is still tied up with these letters and these events all these years later. And I'm sure it will be the same. It would be the same for me. That's upsetting, but the sort of what I take, the sort of heartening thing I take from it in some ways is like, this was so clearly their tactic, so clearly an MO. However, it was also their undoing. If he hadn't have manipulated her in such a cruel way to remain attached to him even after he'd left, she wouldn't have searched for him all those years. She wouldn't have uncovered everything she uncovered was as a result of them using these manipulative tactics on us, and likewise the same for us too. And so you know, it was cruel, it was manipulative, and it inevitably, in the end, it was their undoing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really key.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the word cruel is very describes it really well. It's like they didn't see us as real people at all, with real feelings, real lives, you know, real dignity. There's just none of that. It's more like we were something, you know, in a petri dish to be played with. And you know, it is upsetting even all these years later to feel, you know, to think of your young self being, you know, deceived like that. And yeah, again, cruel, really cruel, and not seen as a real person. I mean, what were they doing? These are professional people who, you know, we're paying for with our tax. It's beyond belief that they could have spent all this energy doing these things. And for Helen, it was just clear he was there. That was his main purpose, to get with Helen. And it's shocking, isn't it, really?
Yeah, I mean, some of the details, I mean, the extent to which he went, we claiming that his father had died, then claiming that his mother had died. She lent him £300 to go to New Zealand to go to the funeral. We see the letter describing the funeral, which is, I mean, it's just all lies.
All unnecessary as well. I mean, I guess, you know, this is the thing. If all he wanted was information, if all they wanted was information, they could have just gone to the meetings. They could, you know, the friendships that they formed and then the relationships that they formed. It wasn't just, you know, this is the thing. Wasn't just about sex. You know, it wasn't just about getting information. It was that kind of the real intimacy of those connections and the real details that were used. And, you know, that's what made them so emotionally affecting, wasn't it? The friendships and the relationships, the fact that they had all this extra detail in them.
Yeah, I mean, it feels, you know, we've had feelings before about that they talk to each other about their conquests, you know, and which how clever they were at you know, sleeping with as many women, or, you know, trying to manipulate women. And I wonder if they did talk about it and were in competition with each other and bragging. But, you know, we'll never get a sense of that because they won't own up to it even now and admit that's what they were doing and be sorry that they're not sorry.
Yeah, you could get a bit of a flavour of that when you saw his report, couldn't you? When he was describing someone else's relationship as like somebody being used for sexual gratification or something like that. That was in his language. So that was obviously the kind of style that they were used. That was how they spoke to each other because that's what was in his police report. That's, you know, when he's writing it for, you know, his manager, Bob, or his, you know, whoever his managers were, he would have, that was the language he used. So it was obviously, that was how he was viewing his own, you know, it's telling about his own behavior.
Yeah, revealed a lot. I think that really did. I think you're completely right that sort of, dehumanized language about sex and sexuality it's just gross. He used some other there was some really sort of almost like really weird. I mean, his thing about he had this jade pendant that was given to him by an elderly Maori woman, that it meant a lot to him, that he never stopped wearing it, but he wanted to give it to her because she was the only other thing that caught his eye as much, and he asked her to wear it at all times. And Helen just saying that she never wore jewelry, but she wore that, and she wore it all the time.
Yeah, and it's that kind of thing that made me, you know, that meant that when he went, she had something, and she said it in, you know, something to mean that she thought of him every single day.
Yes.
And I just don't understand why they, after they've left, why they're wanting to create such a strong imprint of themselves afterwards. Like, surely, you know, and we know, like I've said, that was their undoing, you know, the amount of attachment that they left behind when they went, the amount of impact that they left behind them. You know, his imprint was like physically around her neck the whole time after he'd gone. So obviously she's going to look for him. I just, you know, I don't quite understand why they did it in that way.
It's almost like they're trying to engineer an amount of emotional trauma that will result in the individual no longer feeling they have the stomach for the kind of political activism that had caused them to be a reason for a target in the first place. I mean, that's my reading of it.
Right. Yeah, that's a good, I mean, I don't know why I haven't thought of it like that before.
Yeah, it's just like messing with your psyche, really, and undermining your confidence. you know, as young people, we were very confident and very sure of ourselves. And, you know, this experience has had a big effect on all of us, you know, undermining our confidence, even, you know, having effects to this present day. So it's just totally unjustified.
Yeah. So I guess even in leaving, even after leaving, they're still sowing discord. They're still trying to like sow division in the groups or disrupt. They're still disrupting, I guess.
Yes.
But using emotional trauma as a way to disrupt. And remove effectiveness.
So,
I mean, I think there's something about that as well in the way in which they operated at the time, in terms of, you know, it's like gaining sympathy, getting the activist to invest all their sympathy in them rather than in the other issues which motivate them to mobilize and take action.
Yeah, that's just reminded me of the bit where it's like in his poll tax arrest. You know, he tells the activists he was beaten up by the cops. He tells the cops he was crushed by the activists' throng. You know, who knows what the actual truth was? I don't know.
I think I bet the cops beat him up.
I'm sure they did. I mean, we've obviously we've seen what happened. We've seen the cops. Well, we've all seen the cops beat multiple people up, but we've seen them beat up an undercover officer as well. You know.
Yeah. And they just want to bring up about the marbles in his pocket. That when he was arrested, he had marbles in his pocket, and he didn't tell Helen about that. You know, really, again.
I mean, did he, or did you just put it on the?
Well, I mean, marbles. Well, I think they were probably there because it was on the list. There was no indication that they knew at that time
they knew that
he was police. But you know, obviously, marbles are used to. You know, for police horses to make them fall over, and obviously that's not very nice for the horses. So yeah, maybe that's why he didn't tell Helen about that.
I mean, I think it's that point that it's one of those things which the police bring up of like, oh, look how irresponsible the activists are. I think we see similar thing with Christine Green and the release of the mink. You know, it's irresponsible activity that like undermines the actions of activists.
Yeah. And actually, it was the undercover cops that had the marbles all along. That's what this. That's what that shows.
I mean, a lot of it has been quite difficult to listen to, particularly at the end there. We broken early for lunch because Helen was feeling quite emotional. Essentially, she was being asked, you know, like, why was she willing to go such lengths for him? And I mean, obviously, the point being that she had very, very, very strong, I don't want to use words that she hasn't, but very, very strong feelings for him.
And that he'd engineered those feelings. That's what we have seen definitely clearly today.
Entirely, and just, you know, that it's still having a huge impact now, 40 years later.
Yeah, it really is. You know, and as Lisa says, it's just reminds us all of all our situations because they're all very similar. You know, we were all hoodwinked in this way, and they all used embellishments to unnecessarily, you know, reel us in and keep us there, and left us in the same way. Wrote similar letters. You know, there's so many.
I think that what's quite individual, I think possibly, or not individual, but what stands out more from Helen's situation is the amount of sort of post-leaving manipulation that there was, where there was the like, oh, I've gone, but I wish you'd come with me, and here's another letter keeping you on the hook, and here's another one, and here's another one. She just being completely strung out in what almost seems like a deliberately sadistic way, rather than like, I can't see the operational, you know, like apart from what you said, the operational you know, use for that could be in order to remove Helen's effectiveness as an activist by leaving her emotionally traumatized. But seeing that really, you know, reading that in those paragraphs, it's quite stark, you know, that that he was just continually playing with her emotions after he left.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is just incredibly gross. I mean, how anybody could be so cruel, so manipulative, and sadistic. I mean, we've seen from his comments that I'm not going to repeat them now because again they're incredibly gross. But the comments he's made since to the inquiry, just showing that he never had any feelings for her at all. You know, that he was simply using her in various ways. I mean, what a bastard.
Yeah, and by saying that, you know, he's continuing by saying that to traumatize Helen now and all of us, you know, just by and his total lack of acceptance of what he's done and his refusal to come and appear at the hearing as well, of course.
Yeah, it's continuing callousness, and like you say, it's continuing emotional manipulation by you know, blowing hot and cold, saying one thing, saying a different thing, being contradictory. All of that is still quite sadistic manipulation, it seems, and self-protection. Obviously, they've all got a big dollop of that.
Oh yeah, huge amounts of that. But I mean, it was very telling the way in which he operated in terms of like when he was arrested at the poll tax riot. He went to see her the next day. He told her that he wouldn't be going to the hearing, so that then when there was a warrant issued for his arrest, he claimed that the police had raided his home. He went to her. He said, "Oh, can you ring my work so that they know that I can't go in?" She rings the work, which is like obviously a cover address and Liz speaks to somebody who's working for the police. Right, well, it was obviously a copper who says, "Oh, the police have been here as well." And this way in which he sort of drags her in. In the letters to her, he asks her not to share the contents of the letters, even though in a lot of cases there's nothing particularly, in there. But he's kind of creating a situation where they've got shared secrets, where there's this sort of, and this is something we see throughout all the undercover deployments, of creating this sort of ring of secrecy between the undercover officer and their target, so that when they do leave, and there's maybe some people have got questions about that person, people are like, "Oh, not sharing things which would put together would expose stuff."
Because they don't want to upset.
And they're leaving behind people who will defend them. I guess that is the other reason to keep people on the hook in this way. Although this is particularly sadistic, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, some kind of torture, really. I mean, every word that you read from those letters, it's like, what was he thinking of? How could he say that?
And I guess the other thing it makes me think of is, in the legal case we were bringing back in the day, all those years ago that we brought that legal case. It was one of the things was one of the human rights being mentioned wasn't just about right to privacy. It was being subjected to degrading and inhumane treatment. And it's not the sexual relationship itself that was the only degrading and inhumane bit. It's this bit is the particularly degrading and inhumane bit. The stringing out, the emotional letters, the like you say, the bringing somebody into a ring of secrecy and then leaving. All of that is the degrading and inhumane treatment, and those words like really accurately describe these letters, I think.
Yeah, totally. We've had some comments. Let's take us through them. One here from Emma W. Helen has been phenomenal, been listening all morning. What she's been through since being a young woman has been so much to bear. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you can't quite believe really that like her life has been from such an early age. Her life has been, undercover deployment, targeting by McDonald's, long running court case after a long running court case. I mean, it's incredible. She's still standing and is still so incredibly strong and so incredibly detailed. I mean, one of the reasons why we know about this feels such particularly cruel torture is partially because we've just got all the detail of it, because she's got all the letters, she's kept all the details. She kept a diary, she's got photographs of everything. She's a meticulous archivist, and that has meant
her memory for dates is amazing, and it's makes me worry about if I ever get called to give evidence, which I'm starting to doubt is ever going to happen, but presumably that is going to happen at some point. My memory for dates, even 15 years ago when we started this process, wouldn't have been as accurate as hers is now, 40 years after events.
Dude, my memory for dates last month is not as good as Helen's is. Great.
I think, your memory, you'll find, will probably come back. I mean, in contrast to the undercover cops who can't remember anything at all. They can't. It's not just they can't remember the dates, they can't even remember it happened. Even things that are very significant, that they should remember, that obviously they would remember. They can't remember it, but we can remember details like what the weather was like, what we were wearing almost.
And I was wondering, because I wasn't here for Bob Lambert's evidence, but I know you both were. I couldn't bear it. I just couldn't bear it. I listened to your analysis rather than his words, because for my own mental health. But just contrasting sort of his demeanor and his ability to remember facts with Helen. I wonder if it seems very stark hearing them sort of one day and then the next.
It just seems too much coincidence that all the police are all, so useless and can't remember anything. Whereas all the women are like really sharp and can remember every detail. So, what does that tell us? It obviously tells us they're lying.
And can you tell a difference with Mitting's demeanour? Because I'm particularly struck today by how interested he is with everything, and engaged he is with everything that Helen's saying.
He is so engaged today. And when she got upset, he put his hand over his mouth. He was very which is unusual. He's normally got a fair bit of decorum, though he's often wrapped in he's always very engaged in what's being said. I think, the contrast though from Lambert, it's so strong. It's so strong. I mean, just if people could see the look on his face when he was asking Lambert to clarify what he knew about Mark Jenner and the living arrangements with Alison, compared to the look on his face today when, some of the little jokes that Helen made, even he found it hilarious. He was so sort of in there, which who knows what difference that'll make to anything, but it's reassuring to see in some sense.
Yeah. And I guess it just shows the difference in the humanity of the witness. How much that human beings in the room respond to a human being giving evidence, but when it's a cop who is sort of parroting a line or trying to put on a persona or trying to be a character, that there isn't a human response to that.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. We've got a lot more to come from Helen. She'll be giving evidence all afternoon. She'll also be back next week for one after the next Wednesday afternoon, and then again in July. So there's a lot more to come from Helen. I feel like we've covered a fair bit of ground, but it's only really a small amount. It's all been focused on Dines. Of course, she was spied on by many other undercover officers. I don't know if we'll get onto those or not today, but there's a lot to come.
I guess we have also had evidence from Helen before, haven't we? So people can go back and watch her other days of evidence if they're interested.
Yes, she gave evidence in tranche 2. It was all very focused on Bob Lambert and the spying that he did on under Greenpeace, which of course exactly was just before Dines. In many ways, there's like a relay from Lambert to Dines, and this is something which the SDS seemed to do, and the MPOIU did across the board, of putting officers back into the same groups they previously had an officer, so that new officer had a lot of foreknowledge of the character and personalities within the group.
Yes, it's definitely reminding me of my own experience with when Mark Kennedy arrived not long after Rob Richardson had disappeared. Not that I want to call him Rob, unknown surname, dead child identity using officer, but it just felt like Mark Kennedy would have hit the ground running because he would have had the knowledge of not only the names and the names of the groups or that kind of information, but the real personalities of people around.
Yeah, it's definitely something that they really, and we heard from John Webb yesterday that was a key part of SDS strategy, the long-termness, the targeting of the same targeting, repeated same targeting. It was an early finish for lunch, so we'll be going back in at 25 to 2, which means the broadcast should start at 10 to 2. Please tune in if you can. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, just to say that I thought there was quite a lot of elements about the sort of agent provocateur type things today, from Helen, because it was all about he suggested it, he gave them a lift, it was his idea. The whole thing is engineered, which is quite astonishing.
Yeah, I was quite struck by how much, as well as the political activity of that, also a lot of the social sort of activity. He was organising, day trips, basically inserting himself into the middle of the friendship group, and
helping the gelling of the group. With him as a central point of that.
Yeah, and as the person who did all the driving, the person with the van. And also how, whenever he had any sort of official documentation, whether it was when he was arrested or when he hired a vehicle, he was putting Helen's name and number on the documents.
Yeah, that was quite, I don't know, that was shocking. I didn't really quite understand, was he just basically trying to hide his own pivotal role in the group? Because I guess if he's the pivotal person who's always hiring a vehicle, who's always driving people, who's always, he doesn't want a paper trail for that. He wants, and as we can see that Helen is often framed as being more, being more of a sort of ringleader than she
Actually was.
was. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just quickly, there's 60 people watching. Only 6 of you have liked this. I know it's such a the cliche thing to say, but please, if you could like this video and share it, subscribe, put on your notifications for updates. It really helps how visible this reporting on the inquiry is. There's no other media here today, as there hasn't been for the entirety of this phase. And throughout the inquiry, there's very little media coverage. So it falls to us as the people who are affected in order to get the message out. So please help us do that if you're at all able to. Anything else either of you would like to add?
No, I think that's it for now.
Thanks for joining us. We'll do another video in the break this afternoon and at the end of the day. So join us then if you can. And you can still tune in. It's audio only, but you can hear everything that Helen is saying.